Halo 5 was, for many people, a disappointment, specifically in regards to the campaign and the way that it played out. For fans of the Master Chief, we only really got 3 levels dedicated to the Chief, and Blue Team, by far the most lore-saturated Spartan team in existence, which for their first canonical appearance in an actual mainline Halo game was an absolute crime that we didn't get more of them, to be quite honest. But Halo 5 also introduced Fireteam Osiris, a collection of Spartan 4s which we spent the lion's share of the campaign with. The problem is that we really didn't bond or engage with any of the members of Fireteam Osiris, save for Spartan Buck being a returning character from the earlier Halo 3 ODST. But once you analyse the story of Halo 5 a little deeper, you realise that the reason that we only got 3 levels for the Master Chief, and the reason that we didn't really gel with Fireteam Osiris, actually have canonical reasons that make sense. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So, before we get into that, let's roll the intro. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and by my own admission, I have only played through Halo 5 Guardians from start to finish once. Only once. I've periodically jumped back in and played specific missions or specific parts of specific missions to get game footage or to look at a little aspect of the lore that needed extrapolating for a video here on YouTube, but really playing it from start to finish like I have done all of the other Halo campaigns, I've only done it once for Halo 5. Now, I have read a lot of the books that extrapolated a lot of the background stories of a lot of the characters of Halo 5, as well as expanding the narrative of things that were going on around the time of Halo 5, so I understand the story pretty well. But it wasn't until I saw recent conversation happening in my Discord that I read a few messages and had the storyline put together and put into perspective in a way I'd never considered before. All of the pieces were there, all of the bits of lore made sense, but I'd never actually pieced them together in this particular way, which actually explained a lot of the narrative decisions that happened in Halo 5, at least from a canonical standpoint. Now again, yes, we can quite easily sit here and go, Halo 5 had a troubled development anyway. We know that about halfway through its development, a good chunk of the campaign was basically canned. That's why the Hunt the Truth ad campaign was at odds with the actual campaign that we got, and a lot of the other inconsistencies. So yeah, we know in real terms why we got Halo 5 in the way that we got it. But looking at the canon, looking at the lore, there are actually viable reasons as to why the campaign played out the way that it did. So before we get going, I can't claim credit for putting the lore together in this way. I already knew all of the lore surrounding it, but I had another person by the name of DragonstoneH in my Discord who put a series of messages in the domain general chat that suddenly put the lore surrounding Halo 5 into stark contrast to my broader understanding of the lore of Halo 5. So big thanks to DragonstoneH, whom has given his blessing for me to present this to you in video format. So big thanks to Dragonstone, and if you want to pitch your own ideas, or if you want to get in on the conversations that happen in the Discord, there's a link in the description down below. Jump into the Discord and let's get talking. But now, let's move on to the story of Halo 5. So first things first, the Master Chief, and more broadly, Blue Team. They have been entrenched in the lore for as long as Halo has been called Halo. They have extremely well fleshed out character dynamics, personalities, likes, dislikes, preferences, and ways in which they go about engaging enemies on the battlefield. They are a team that are saturated in lore. And yet, in Halo 5, we only got 3 levels dedicated to Blue Team, and during those levels, we really learned next to nothing about the members of Blue Team, beyond their rather shallow comments on the mission at hand in trying to find Cortana. You have to understand here, we have some of the most talented Spartans in existence in this team. Linda is by far the best sniper that has ever existed, to the point that she's so good that a spotter actually holds her back. She's better as a lone wolf. She customizes, dials in and tunes her sniper rifle to such a degree that it is one of the most precise weapons in existence in her hands. We have Kelly, the fastest Spartan in existence. Not only has she got markedly faster reaction times than other Spartans, but she can sprint significantly faster than other Spartans, and she is absolutely devastating in up close and personal combat. We have Fred, who's the second best marksman of all Spartans, one of the best strategists and tacticians, technically outranks the Master Chief himself because Fred is actually an officer, and is an absolute artist with blades and knives, and leading them the most legendary of all Spartans, the Master Chief. This team by rights should have been completely celebrated in its first canonical appearance in a mainline Halo game, and yet we only got 3 levels. Why? Well, from a lore standpoint, it actually does make a lot of sense when you consider Cortana and what Cortana was doing during the events of Halo 5, but in order to understand that, we need to rewind the clock a little bit to the last moments that she had during Halo 4. Upon being loaded into the systems of the Mantle's approach, she shed a lot of her rampant personality fragments into the Mantle's approach's systems. In the final moments of the campaign, these numerous personality fragments rendered themselves with hard light from the bridge upon which the Didact and the Master Chief were stood. Now, these numerous versions of her weren't just copies, they were the various rampant personality fragments of Cortana that she had shed into the system. They were all technically unique instances of Cortana, and in the final instant, when Chief activated the Havoc tactical nuke, Cortana used the hard light bridge to protect Chief from the blast and get him clear. The Mantle's approach was destroyed, but as an emergency failsafe, the ship attempted to translocate itself through space to a known repair facility, which just so happened to be Genesis. And with this emergency transition, even though it was basically in tatters, parts of Cortana herself were transported along with it, and on Genesis she found her way to the domain, where her rampancy was cured. But this particular fragment of Cortana that ended up in the domain wasn't the whole Cortana that we know and love. It was an assemblance of broken fragments of Cortana, that while she possessed all of the memories and knowledge of the Cortana we know, she also lacked some of the personality traits that were typical of Cortana, meaning that this new version, this immortal version that had been reborn in the domain, was a version that had aspects of cruelty and megalomania, ultimately leading to the Cortana that we received in Halo 5. And whilst in the domain, she developed the plan to effectively kidnap the Master Chief and hold him within a cryptum while she reformed the galaxy. That was her long-term goal. The fact that Blue Team were along for the ride was neither here nor there. This overarching storyline meant that the path was majoritively clear for Chief and Blue Team to get to Genesis. Cortana effectively paved the way for them. They didn't have to visit Sanghelios, they weren't really fighting enemies per se on Meridian, and when they got to Genesis, their way was practically cleared by Cortana so that they could reach the cryptum that much faster, so she could trap John and Blue Team that much faster. This ultimately explains why we only had 3 levels for Chief and Blue Team in Halo 5. But now it's time to talk about Fireteam Osiris and why we just didn't bond with them in the same way that we've bonded with other characters in the Halo franchise. And for that we need to look at the backstories of the members of Fireteam Osiris to fully understand it. So let's start with Locke, who was born on Jericho 7 and was orphaned when the Covenant attacked in 2535. Being an orphan from a war with alien aggressors will inevitably have some degree of psychological impact on the individual. He was thus placed in a state orphanage, and when him and many of the other children came of age, many of them chose to enlist with the UNSC, but Locke decided not to go in that direction, because although he wanted revenge on the Covenant, he also somewhat blamed the government for not acting in defending his colony in the first place. ultimately leading to the deaths of his loved ones. So rather than enlisting with the UNSC, Locke became a freelance tracker and assassin. Again, the nature of this work, hunting down individuals and then executing them, will take a psychological toll on the individual. The combined effects of both his being orphaned at a very young age and growing up in a state orphanage after his parents were killed by aliens, and then moving into a line of work that involves tracking human beings down for probably quite a large portion of time. That will generally be a very isolated profession, and then ultimately culminating in him killing his targets. Again, a very unpleasant aspect of that work means that Locke's personality as a whole is very disjointed and disconnected. On top of this, he was then noticed by the Office of Naval Intelligence, who wanted to effectively groom him and shape him to fill a specific role. He accepted this and then went into training with the Office of Naval Intelligence, and we all know what Oni are like as far as their espionage, their training, and the fact that they frequently skirt what is legal or illegal in regards to crimes against humanity. And again, this nature of work for Locke would have him on his own for large portions of his working life. All of this culminates in a personality that is very guarded, very closed off, very introverted, evidently harbouring some unresolved traumas and an overall distrust even in his current employer, the Office of Naval Intelligence. Moving on to Olympia Veil. Now Veil, we've had her personality expanded quite considerably in some of the books, particularly in Hunters in the Dark and Outcasts, where her personality, her interests, and the fact that she was a child prodigy were very broadly expanded and explained. She is actually a very interesting character, but the problem with Veil's character and her portrayal during Halo 5 is that it doesn't play to her strengths. Vale is actually a daughter of a would-have-been Spartan 2. Caleb was identified as being a potential candidate for the Spartan 2 program, but when his kidnapping and replacement with a Flash clone was arranged, Caleb couldn't be found. It was thought that he had a degree of precognition and effectively knew in advance that something bad was going to happen and made himself scarce. So Olympia Veil already heralds from a rather noble bloodline. On top of this, as mentioned, she was a child prodigy who had an innate skill in languages, evidently able to learn many languages that were not her mother tongue from an extraordinarily young age, which may demonstrate already a very elevated IQ. On what was supposed to be a 6-day trip from their home colony to Earth because her mother had been reassigned by UNSC High Command, their slip space drive failed and what was going to be 6 days ended up taking 6 months, limping back to the Sol system trying to avoid Covenant patrols as they went. During this time, Vale entertained herself by listening to Sangheili transmissions and then compared them to translations made by artificial intelligence, and then effectively taught herself how to become fluent in Sangheili, a skill she developed so well that after the war had ended and humans and elites had alliances, the Sangheili even commented on how well she spoke their language. In either case, after studying at Sydney University, she followed in her mother's footsteps and enlisted with the UNSC, specifically Signals Intelligence. Her fluency in Sangheili would prove invaluable in the subsequent years following the end of the Human Covenant War, particularly during peace talks and negotiations between humanity and the Sangheili, even serving as a professional diplomat and liaison during negotiations for peace treaties. So many of Vale's skills weren't really conducive with her role as seen in Halo 5. Admittedly, we spend a relatively decent amount of the campaign on Sanghelios, which would have been fascinating for Vale as a character, but because we were on mission and pursuing the Master Chief, we didn't get to see the character development and the expression, or the full expression, of Vale's character while on Sanghelios, clearly demonstrating that her personal interests and her expertise don't always align very well with her job as a Spartan. There are, of course, certainly times where it is useful, but most of Halo 5's campaign, it proved not to be useful. So as a consequence, we don't really see much of Vale's personal development. Next we have Tanaka, who was born on the colony of Minab in 2530. In 2550, however, Minab was glassed by the Covenant because it was utterly undefended. At this stage in the Human-Covenant War, the siege of human-controlled space was fully underway and really coming to a close. Humanity were all but on the edge of extinction, and Minab was a colony left unto its own with no defences from the UNSC whatsoever because they were too heavily engaged elsewhere in the galaxy. This meant that the Covenant basically steamrolled Minab, glassing the colony entirely, plunging it into a nuclear winter, and then occupying it to some degree thereafter. Holly Tanaka, her father, and some other survivors would survive on the planet within mines and tunnels underneath the surface of the planet and in the highlands of the planet during this nuclear winter for months, hiding from, avoiding, and running away from Jackal and skirmisher parties, desperately trying to survive and wondering whether they should send a distress beacon that would draw the UNSC when it could just as equally draw their enemies. Her survival was tested to near breaking point when an assailant of the survivors made their way to Jackal and skirmisher forces and effectively drew the Jackal and skirmishers' attention to where the rest of the survivors were. In the struggle to fight off the Jackals, it is assumed that Holly's father was actually killed by the Jackal forces, and she was kidnapped by two colonial insurgents that took her to a cave in the highlands to hide away from the Jackal forces. After 3 days, the three of them used guerrilla tactics and distractions to slip by the Jackal forces and give themselves some distance from the Covenant occupation. For the following few months, they were wandering the glassed surface of Minab until they were recovered by UNSC forces in 2553, over 2 years since the colony fell, being forced to survive in caves and bunkers and tunnels, along with other survivors, along with spending, I would imagine, large portions of time in isolation, can be some extremely traumatizing experiences. And having lost her entire family, her mother, her brothers, her father, and then being kidnapped, didn't help this at all. After being recovered, she enlisted with the UNSC Army and became an engineer assigned to the 412th Engineer Command of the UNSC Army Corps of Engineers. Harkening back to a pronounced skill with engineering and mechanical systems during her time with her father and the survivors in the caves, as she was frequently relied upon as being one of the best engineers and was able to assemble and maintain fusion reactors to keep the mine operational. Becoming a UNSC Army engineer likely meant that she became so specialised that she likely didn't really mesh very well with others, which was helped in no small part by the additional trauma that she would have experienced following the glassing of her homeworld. And the final member of Fireteam Osiris is a fan favourite, Edward Buck. He was a gunnery sergeant and the leader of Alpha 9, the ODST squad that were central to the story of Halo 3 ODST, who, in contrast to the other members of Fireteam Osiris, had excellent dynamics with the members of Alpha 9 during the events of ODST, as well as the reunion with Alpha 9 during the books New Blood and Bad Blood, that chronicled further missions of Alpha 9 as ODSTs, and the members of Alpha 9 being reunited and becoming Spartan 4s together. So now with the background story of the 4 members of Fireteam Osiris really fleshed out, we can summarise the members of Fireteam Osiris as follows. We have Locke, who was orphaned by the Human Covenant War, became an assassin, and then eventually became a member of the Office of Naval Intelligence, distrusts the organisation that he works with, and carries with him some trauma. We have Vale, whose expertise and interests don't always match up very well with her responsibilities as a Spartan, which means that a lot of her personality just wasn't on display during the events of Halo 5. We have Tanaka, who spent a large amount of time underground in caves and tunnels following the glassing of her home colony, the loss of all of her family, the survival and ordeal that she went through for over 2 years on her home colony, and then her over-specialisation in the Army Engineer Corps. We have another person that carries trauma and isn't very charismatic or very socially adapted, and then there's Buck, whom, while he is a fan favourite, can't be expected to carry all of the charisma, all of the engagement, and all of the interest of an entire team of Spartans. So in broad summary, the reason why we really didn't engage with Fireteam Osiris is because 3 of the 4 members of Fireteam Osiris are heavily introverted, carry with them immense levels of trauma, or just due to the nature of their past, or their current job, or their general situation, they're just not very open and engaging characters. And that goes a good way of explaining why we didn't bond with Fireteam Osiris, and why we only got 3 levels with Blue Team during the events of Halo 5. Thanks again to Dragonstone. Give me your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Be sure to like the video if you did, and pop a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Sylphia, Mikhail, Ashley, Jordan and Esoteric Sight, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Legions Lost, Labrat, Spartan0137, Jacob Kemp, Sean, Element Zero, J3, Mr. Keys, Gunslinger, Evermore, Personal Devil, Aldeas, Toxic, Scion Esports, Gem, Saber and Relentless, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who continue to support the channel. If you want your name on the end of the video and some perks earned along the way, head over to Patreon and consider supporting the channel yourself. Big shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob Kemp, Talia, Fenrir, Bornstella, Jimbo and Balaz, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy, with a special mention to the Accursed Hunter. Shout out to John due to the mathematical formula used to determine the area within a pentadodecahedron. Oh, and Lena because that sandwich. And remember, there are tons of ways to support the channel and keep my installation pumping out content at a breakneck speed. Much love to you all, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.